from there, we'll go ahead and start recording. So basically, I mean, obviously the questions I provided, I'm still hearing an echo. I think I'm gonna have to re-record my voice. That's okay. I'm not hearing an echo on your end. So as long as your voice is documented, we're okay. So since I provided the preliminary questions, they're not necessarily set in stone, but they're, again, meant to provide a framework for it. And the conversation obviously will go in terms of whatever you would like to highlight in the context of your own experiences. And one thing I did want to ask you is if you wanted anonymity, or were you okay with me referring to you by your name, or I could always use a pseudonym too. What is your preference?
You can use my legal name. It's fine.
Okay, so Michelangelo is fine. Okay, all right. So I'm gonna go ahead and start up. Right. So welcome back to Voices of Diversity. We will be talking about the deferred action against childhood arrivals in the context of being undocumented in graduate school. And we are very fortunate to be joined by Michelangelo, who is a doctoral student. So these past couple of weeks and this year really has been very challenging for numerous communities, but especially challenging for DACA students, better known as Dreamers, especially in terms of the current administration having currently rescinded the ability for DACA students to renewal. Can you speak a little bit about what these last few weeks have been like?
Yeah, so it's been a mess the last couple of weeks. So I'm currently at UC Riverside, and we're in the quarter system. So the campus is basically empty. So the moment DACA hit, a lot of people weren't on campus. So it was really hard to make contact with the officials to, ask them what's going to happen. Does the university have any plans? Does the system have any plans? Because people were just gone. And it's only been about this week that it's been possible for me to contact people and actually start having these dialogues.
And when you're referring to people, like what specific folks are you having dialogue with?
So a few days ago, I met with the dean of the graduate division, for example, and we met because our major concern was what's going to happen to funding, because as you may know, most of us are funded through TAs or IRA-ships. So without DACA, we're not able to do those. And so without those, we're not able to fund ourselves and continue our graduate studies.
How was that conversation?
The graduate dean and his staff is definitely supportive of us, but it's still unclear what they can do, given all the legal hurdles in immigration law. But they're definitely. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, they're definitely willing to do what they can, and they're trying to see what they can push in.
So how do you feel this current presidential administration, filled with uncertainty, has helped to kind of facilitate the narrative linked to those that are undocumented?
To be honest, I feel this administration actually hasn't been that different than previous administrations. It's definitely been a different magnitude, but in type, this uncertainty was still present during the Obama administration. It was present during the Bush administration. It's just become more wrapped up in degree.
Do you think in turn that this has brought, I mean, obviously more important attention on various levels in terms of bringing the discussion to the foreground?
Yeah. So I do feel that after Obama's initial announcement of DACA in 2012, there was some discussion of what to do with Dreamers, but then it kind of died out. Like I think people felt that the issue had been solved, or at least been pushed down the road enough for everyone to be able to ignore it. And so in a weird way, Trump has helped by reigniting the discussion. Like we've got about 1 million Dreamers or so. The numbers vary, and we got to do something about them. Though I don't think he meant to do that. I think it's been more of an accidental thing on his part, that he's reignited the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. So when we talk about DACA students, a lot of the times, a lot of the research is strictly focused on undocumented students. And obviously, just being in graduate school is tremendously challenging in and of itself, let alone when one is also dealing with the added hurdles in terms of being undocumented. So for those folks who are unfamiliar, what does it mean to be undocumented at a graduate school on a daily level?
On a daily level, the biggest concern I think we have is just financing ourselves. We're not at, it used to be that we weren't eligible for anything at all, and we basically had to self-fund or find someone to support us. Since DACA, we're now eligible for TA-ships and RA-ships, but there's still a lot of fellowships that we're not eligible for. And so I think a big major concern for a lot of us is, how are we going to make rent? How are we going to feed ourselves? How are we going to pay for tuition? Like, that's, at least for me, that's the major concern I have on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. And what resources are available, and have you been able to access both on and off campus so you can navigate day-to-day life?
So fortunately, my campus is supportive of individuals like me. I think there's about a dozen of us, so we're small, but we're not so small that we're invisible. We have a pantry service. There are some scholarships, but they're mostly geared towards undergraduate undocumented students, and so technically we're eligible for them, but the amounts just aren't enough to really cover what we need as a graduate students, and we also have to compete with a lot more undergraduate students, so it's not really feasible, I think, as a sustainable way to fund ourselves.
It's very much resources on a local kind of campus level, but not enough to necessarily address the need on campus for undergraduates and graduate students alike.
Correct. Most of these services are informal or small, or they're just not funded sufficiently. That said, I thank everyone who does their part to help out. I know there aren't that many resources, and they're doing the best they can.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. What I find interesting too, when we talk about debt, for example, and this is something I had mentioned during our email exchange, right? Doctoral students tend to graduate with a great amount of debt, but obviously that's different, and something you mentioned during our previous written discussion, right? Graduate school and undergraduate school is very expensive, and tuition keeps rising and rising. And obviously, you know that DACA helped in the context of TA-ships and readerships, which have been like wonderful, right? But even before that, in the context of undergraduate schooling, right? How have you been able to continue to move forward in your education, given these added financial challenges as well?
So I'm really grateful for my family. They're really the ones who funded my undergraduate education at Cal State Northridge, and without them, I simply wouldn't have been able to do it. I mean, I did some work myself, but it's just not enough money to support yourself. Like, you really need someone to be willing to help you out. And in my case, it was my family. When I moved over to graduate study, though, it became harder because my family, the burden of undergraduate education had taken up most of our savings. And so I knew that anything I did beyond undergraduate studies would be on myself to fund. And I think I ended up spending like a year or two just seeking out any scholarship that I was eligible for. This was in the early days when DACA had just been announced, but the laws were still being revised to take into account that there was these group of students who weren't fully legal, but not really legal. And so we're starting to see some scholarships devoted to DACA students, but not that many. And I ended up getting my master's degree thanks to the Cal State University having the university grants, which basically waived my tuition at the graduate level, but I still had to support myself as far as food and housing went.
So that translated into probably multiple jobs.
Yeah.
So how much has this really necessitated creating kind of creative options to move forward, right? I mean, also in the context, I mean, financial is one aspect, but also in the context of staying emotionally healthy, right? Considering this very, very heavy load you have moving forward in higher education.
Yeah, so mental health, I think, is a major issue for graduate school in general, and for undocumented students, it's even more severe because there's so few people who are trained to deal with our issues. I mean, at the graduate level, there must be maybe 100, 200 of us nationwide. We're not a large group, so I'm not surprised there's few people who know how to train, who are trained to deal with mental issues that we may have unique to our experiences. Fortunately, in Southern California, there's enough of a concentration of us that there are a couple of people, but I still feel that it's not enough. And again, I thank everyone who does their part. The resources are limited, but you still feel that services could be improved on that front.
So has this, in terms of forging communities, oh, pardon, that echo is pretty prominent. In terms of creating these communities, have you also, obviously you mentioned that there's a good supportive population at Riverside, and also in terms of just California as a whole has small numbers, right? I mean, we're talking, like, as you noted, just like a couple of hundred. Possibly nationwide. I know California has the highest concentration of DACA recipients. What are some of the ways that you have reached out to different kind of individuals, or how even different individuals have kind of found you in order to create kind of community?
I feel the undergraduate students have done a better job at creating these communities than the graduate schools, graduate students. And I suspect that's because graduate students we spend all our time reading or RAing or working on various projects that it's very easy to get isolated. And this isn't unique to undocumented graduate students. I think in graduate school in general, there's a tendency to become a loner just because you're so focused on your individual work. And actually, it's only been in the last couple of weeks that I've started to connect with people and reaching out to people, in large part because of the recent actions on DACA, that we've all realized we need to start getting organized. It's not sufficient for us to leave the undergraduates to lead the discussion, because although undocumented undergrads and graduate students have similar concerns, there are some concerns that are unique to graduate students.
Can you elaborate on those challenges? You already mentioned some, right, in the context, obviously, of securing employment, TA-ships or A-ships.
Yeah, so as always, money is always the big issue for me. But besides that, there is the mental health issue. It's also just really having someone to connect with at the department level, because I feel in the graduate school level, after you finish coursework, your most important relationship is between you and your advisor. And it's sometimes really hard to find an advisor that understands your situation. For example, I'm in political science, and sometimes we need to do field work outside of the United States. That isn't practical for me. So I need to find an advisor who understands that and is willing to work around that major hurdle and still help me finish my degree and hopefully get a job in academia.
And how challenging has that been to find an advisor that, I mean, it's obviously it's a very distinct qualifications, but at the same time, very important, right? I mean, to be connected and know with the fact that you work with such a diverse array of students.
So I think in California, we're very blessed that a lot of the faculty members are used to dealing with diverse student populations, but it's still very difficult to find that one person who both fits your research as an academic and understands and can help you out on the personal side. And I think I might have found someone, but I know it could be very difficult for some people. I know a couple of friends in other campuses where they've had to switch advisors multiple times, because although they might be a fit on the paper in regards to purely research interest, the advisors weren't really able to provide the personal touch that they might need given their undocumented status. And I don't think that's a fault of the faculty. Like I said, we're not a large population. I'm not surprised there's very few people who us.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I did want to ask you too is in terms of also advice you would give for someone who graduate is undocumented and considering a doctoral program, right? Given, I believe you're second year at UCR, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm a second year, and in addition to that, I already have a master's degree from a prior school. So I've been in graduate school for about 4 to 5 years now.
Okay, so what advice would you give to folks who are undocumented and are considering graduate school, considering kind of the challenges and the political challenges that are also linked to that?
My two biggest pieces of advice would be, one, don't go to graduate school unfunded. If they're not paying you to go to graduate school, if you don't have some sort of scholarship, something, I think the risks just don't, the risk that you might not finish, that you'll end up with all this debt, is just not worth doing it at the moment. It's better to hold on tight and see if something happens. Because I've seen a lot of people go to what I feel is are either unaccredited or very likely to become unaccredited universities, and I feel these universities prey on the idea that dreamers have, that they should just keep focusing on academia, regardless of the cost. And I do think we have to worry about the cost at times.
Yeah, the cost is obviously financial. Yeah. I don't know if you were aware, but the Office of the President of the University of California recently released a report in the context of mental health in terms of doctoral students specifically. And this report didn't necessarily include information as it relates to undocumented students, although there have been separate reports that have specifically focused on the improved mental health of undocumented students as a result of DACA. Obviously, you have a kind of a distinct shift in that, considering how DACA is being dealt with now, right? And addressing mental health as we continue to move forward in these uncertain times. How does one kind of maintain a productive conversation, right? Considering this larger rhetoric and almost polarization in terms of programs like DACA, and still kind of maintain kind of hope to keep moving forward.
Can you rephrase the question?
Okay, so in terms of mental health, right, the University of California Office of the President recently released a report that focuses on doctoral students' mental health. So it brought to the fore how mental health is a continued issue and challenge in terms of doctoral programs. Because one of the things you mentioned that is prominent across communities or doctoral students specifically is the context of the fact that it's an isolating experience. And when you add to that the challenges linked to also being undocumented, right, there is another issue that's not necessarily reflected in reports, such as a mental health report released by UCOP, but addressed in other reports focused on DACA. So how do we kind of maintain a productive conversation considering these challenges with mental health and the lack of mental health in terms of even having professionals on campus that understand the unique challenges that are linked to dreamers and doctoral programs?
I feel we need to be more open about the existence of mental health issues. Something I've noticed in my graduate programs in general is that there's a certain taboo to ever admitting that you have a mental health problem, because it might signal that you're not capable of finishing your work on your own, or that you might need special care. And I find that taboo to be so strange, because if you have if you had a physical disability, if you had a physical injury, you wouldn't keep quiet about it. You would admit it, and you would ask someone to help you accommodate your situation, because it's understood. It's not like you actively sought out this physical injury, and yet we seem to think that if someone has a mental injury, it's something that they must have sought out. It's something that they wanted for some reason. Like, it's very strange to me.
So
Like
blaming,
yeah, it's blaming the victim, which is very strange to me.
what do you think that says about accountability?
At the department level, or accountability of who?
At multiple levels, at the local university, departmental, institutional, systemic.
I think it's a systemic issue at the academic level. It's not even just the University of California system. I think academia in general has this taboo against discussing mental health issues. And I don't know why. I mean, I don't know. For example, I don't know if you heard, but there was recently a professor at the University of Arizona, I think, that committed suicide. And when he committed suicide, he left a note explaining why he committed suicide. And it was basically mental health problems and how it was taboo to really discuss it in academia. And funnily enough, everyone discussed the suicide, but they didn't really want to touch the taboo subject of, do we have a mental health problem in academia? And is this the logical consequence of what happens when we ignore it long enough?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost this giant elephant in the room with very, I mean, immediate. I was familiar with that case. Very immediate consequences, right? And the fact that these are not isolated incidents, unfortunately, and it is happening more and more, right? I mean, and a lot of it has to do with the context of the resources that are or are not available on a local and national level as well. So,
Definitely, I agree.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of, you mentioned some of the resources that are available in the context of scholarships at your institution. Are there any other resources that are available in order to provide some type of support, or have those resources been kind of more informally created, as you have implied in the context of your discussion?
So a lot of the services I've managed to acquire aren't Dreamer or DACA specific. In most cases, they're incidental things. For example, I'm funded through the UC Mexis Institute, which is a collaboration between the state of California and Mexico, which funds Mexican doctoral students. I'm a Mexican citizen by birth, and so I was eligible for their funding, and I've received a lot of support through them. But as I mentioned, that isn't Dreamer specific. And for example, if you're not a Mexican citizen, it's not something that's going to help you. And I know there's a similar program, I think, for Argentinians and Chileans. And that's one way to fund yourself through graduate school. That's one way to find a community. But I don't think it's enough, because it's not really centered around Dreamers. It's more of a Dreamers can also be part of this group.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you have to be kind of really creative in terms of seeking out these various sources, especially in terms of funding over the long term as it relates to doctoral programs.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few very competitive fellowships, like the Ford Foundation has one, Soros has one, that Dreamers are eligible for, but they're very competitive. Even if you're just a regular citizen, they're very competitive to get. So it's even more competitive for Dreamers who might not have the same resources.
Now, well, I'm very kind of curious to hear your response, and not to be kind of devil's advocate, but to folks who are against renewing programs such as DACA, what would you say to folks who don't necessarily know the entire experience of what it's like to have gone and to pretty much be a part of the U.S. but not have the documentation?
Yeah, what would I tell someone who is not supportive of DACA
or who
being renewed?
Or who wasn't aware of the challenges or what it necessarily means on a daily level to be undocumented and in graduate school?
I'm tempted to try to make an argument that Dreamers who've reached graduate school have somehow earned citizenship because that implies that citizenship is based on your merits as a human being, as opposed to simply something fundamental that all human beings have. I would say we're not strangers. We're not foreigners. We've been here our entire lives. We're very much Americans in everything but name. And we shouldn't be thought of as trying to migrate to the United States, but simply as fellow Americans who have fallen through cracks in the legal system and want to fix that problem. But the current legal system just doesn't provide us any viable path to do so.
Very well said, Michelangelo. Would you like to add anything else before we close up?
Not really. I mean, if you have any further questions, I'm willing to answer, of course.
Yeah, no, I think that's the extent of the questions, at least for now.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit stop broadcast.